Hello, I'm Geraldine Glass, and welcome to the Sacred Science of Sound. I am excited and thrilled to introduce you today to Dr. Daniel Levitin, who is a leading expert on brain science and music. He's worn many hats in his career. Brilliant, brilliant man. He's written New York Times best-selling books, The Organized Mind. He's at work currently on a new book where I was told that he just had an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a book on healthy aging. And he's a doctor and professor. He is the founding dean of the School of Arts at the Minerva Schools, and was a sound engineer, a recording engineer, a record producer, is a fantastic musician. And I met Dr. Levitin. He came to me for some voice coaching, and I'm thrilled to have him here today. Dr. Levitin, welcome to the Sacred Science of Sound.
Thank you, Professor Glass. I'm really so pleased with the instruction you gave me in vocal coaching. It was transformative. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. Great pleasure. So tell us a little bit about brain science, health, music. How does that all come together? What can you give our audience in terms of your expertise on music and brain science health?
Well, to begin with, music is a human universal, meaning that there is no time in history, as far as we know, when humans lacked music. And there's no culture on the planet that lacks music. There's no group of people that don't have it. So we call it a universal. And that tells you something about its importance to our species, I think. And one of the things that we found out in my laboratory and in other laboratories that study music in the brain is that people use music for emotional regulation. That is, they use music in the way you might use drugs. They use a certain kind of music to pep them up in the morning to help them get out of bed, another kind of music to relax at the end of the day, another kind of music to get through an exercise workout, different music if you're trying to calm yourself after getting in a fight with somebody at work, or find your center. People have very strong intuitions about what music they want to use for each of these things. I find that fascinating, and it's true across different cultures, different ages. People have a good sense for how music is going to modulate their mood.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes.
And this is one of the things that you found with your tone bowls and your sacred music work, right?
Yes, I mean, we talked about losing my beloved son 3.5 years ago, and how music and sound, the profession that I'd been in since I was 19 years old, how that was the force that could help me to sit in the feelings and process the feelings, feel the feelings, and have them transform. And never thinking that my life as a musician would so serve me later in life during this time of great loss. So
when people listen to music, there are actual electrical changes in the brain and neurochemical changes. The levels of different neurotransmitters in the brain change when you listen to music. Typically, if you're listening to sad music or comforting music, the brain releases prolactin, which is the same soothing hormone that is released when mothers nurse their infants. And it's released in both the mother and the infant at the same time. Prolactin is found when we cry tears of sadness, but not any other kind of tear. So tears of joy, tears of pain, no prolactin, just in tears of sadness. So it tells you something about the role of this particular chemical that it's elicited by sad music. Other changes are when people listen to music together in a concert setting, for example, they experience increases in oxytocin, which is a chemical that helps us to feel bonded with one another. And all of these things, I'm just scratching the surface, but they're for people who listen to music, but even more so, higher levels of activation of these chemical systems when you're playing the music yourself. And so I think that what you experienced in terms of recovery from the loss of your son, the calming, soothing, and comforting effects of music, as well as the uplifting and spiritual effects, are well known now to have a brain basis, and they're not imaginary. They're, as you could testify, they feel real, and brain scientists have documented that they're biologically real.
There truly is a place where the music touches that medicine or therapies or human touch doesn't go. And I know your one of your books, This Is Your Brain on Music, explored much of that. Yes.
And then one of the other things that I've been interested in is the healing. And of course, we've been talking about the psychic healing or psychological or spiritual healing, however you want to frame it. But there's healing powers of music in other domains, in the physical body. So music therapy, which is the evidence-based use of music in therapeutic or counseling kinds of environments, music therapy increases levels of immunoglobulin A, which are important for fighting infections of the mucosal system. They can increase levels of melatonin, which help you to regulate your sleep and wake cycles. The interesting thing is that melatonin, as many of you know from biology classes you may have taken somewhere along the line, melatonin, increases in melatonin lead to an increase in the production of cytokine, which leads to an improvement in T cell production. T cells are the body's natural immune response that help to fight infections of all kinds. Following music therapy, we've seen increases in epinephrine and norepinephrine, the drugs that modulate attention and arousal. And here's another one. As you know, stress is associated with an increased risk of coronary heart disease. Coronary heart disease is related to endothelial dysfunction. And we found that patients who listen to joyful music, however that's defined by the patient, not the therapist. You get to decide what's joyful to you in music therapy. Patients who listen to joyful music showed significant increases in their arterial dilation to a level obtained with aerobic activity or statin therapy. So these people were reducing the risk of coronary heart disease just by listening to music at levels that rival some of the statins that are widely prescribed. And not to take too sharp a detour here, but statins have a lot of side effects. You're 15 times more likely to experience a side effect of a statin than the helpful benefits of it. And the side effects are terrible. They're gastrointestinal distress, chronic pain, nausea, numbness at the extremities. I mean, music doesn't cause any of that.
I think the world is really lucky to have a scientist like you and also a musician in one package. And is this some of the research that, I know you were heading the department at the McGill University for many years. Is this some of the research that was done there?
Well, I didn't head the department. I don't want to take credit for things I didn't do, but I did head the laboratory. The study of music perception and cognition. I was the director of a large laboratory. And this is some of the work that we did. We also wrote review papers of what other people had done and tried to figure out whether the other labs had done sound work or not, or competent work. One of the interesting findings that came from those reviews was that listening to music prior to surgery in an operating room, in a pre-op setting, was found to be as effective as diazepam, trade name Valium, for reducing stress and anxiety. Again, no side effects, just music. So the healing powers of music are being carefully documented. Listening to music can help release dopamine, which is what's deficient in Parkinson's disease. So there's a lot of promise and hope for music therapy and music neuroscience, but we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah, I mean, I know from my own experience using the bowls, to come back to what you said about joy, somehow I'm playing the crystal alchemy bowls for cancer patients. And what transpires in that hour and a half of meditation and group togetherness, sharing music and the alchemy bowls is so powerful. And I walk out of there filled with joy. That's the best way to describe it. The patients walk out of there, no matter what their condition is, feeling joy.
Well, this is the other thing that's kind of paradoxical, but one of the things I learned from studying the works of the Dalai Lama and from meeting with him was that he's committed his life to public service. Really, he's committed his life to helping others. That's what his entire life since the age of 6 has been directed towards. And one of the things I asked him was, what do you do if you're depressed? A lot of people in the Western world are depressed or unhappy. And he said the best way to overcome that is to help others.
Yeah.
That you quickly find that your sense of unhappiness disappears when you're helping other people less fortunate than you. And for most of us in the West, there's a big world of people who are less fortunate than us. Some of them right here at our doorsteps.
Yeah. Yes, it's true. I never thought when I was sunk in despair and grief, that by volunteering for the cancer support community, that would change my life the way it's changed my life. It's profound. So that's something that one can always reach into that pocket and share from your heart and be generous of spirit. That has a lot to do with health and well-being, and music and sound can certainly be a part of that. I saw a picture from your interview with His Holiness that just made me smile, because you had him laughing. You were laughing. You want to tell us a little bit about that interview and maybe a little bit about what your new book is about?
He and I laughed a lot. The message that he has, of course, in addition to helping others, is to practice compassion and to get rid of anger in your life. What we know, he's spent a lot of time with neuroscientists. He's taken an interest in neuroscience. He's visited neuroscience labs, and he's collaborated on studies of meditation and its beneficial effects. And what he knew even before he met with neuroscientists is something that took neuroscientists a while to figure out. It's one of these cases where Buddhist teaching led science by many centuries. And that's the finding that stress actually is harmful to the body in distinct and discrete biological ways. And so if you feel anger, if you become consumed by anger or related emotions such as revenge, jealousy, fury, these feelings rip apart your body. They compromise your immune system. They release cortisol, which can lead to cloudy thinking and to ulcers and elevated heart rate to the point of hypertension, blood pressure problems. They impact your cholesterol levels, all this from stress and anger. Now, it's a natural part of life to feel anger. And there are debates about whether you should suppress your emotions or not, because if you tamp them down too far, they sometimes have a way of sneaking out.
Right.
But His Holiness's resolution of that is to meditate on it and let it go. So you're not trying to tamp it down. You're allowing it to exist. But you also try to give it a way to, you try to rechannel it and refocus it. And that's what his form of meditation is about. And he doesn't feel anger. He works at it. It's not easy. But, even people who are trying, the Chinese government is still actively trying to kill him. So he's heavily guarded. And you might think he's angry at the Chinese government, but he doesn't seem to feel it. He's let it go. Namaste. It
takes a big being to do that, and to trust that how life is exactly how it should be, and that the challenges are there really for us to feel them and process them.
I did ask him, I think the moment that we were laughing in that picture you saw, I'm not sure, I have to go check, but I think it was, I said, I understand you practice nonviolence, and you not only practice it, but you preach it, as the spiritual leader to so many millions of Buddhists. I said, somebody's coming at you with a knife and they're about to kill you, and you can't get away. And you've got a gun, what do you do? And he says, and he laughed. He says, well, in a situation like that, you can defend yourself, you can shoot them, but don't kill them.
Tell us a little bit about the book. What is it what brought you to interview His Holiness the Dalai Lama and to Buddhism? What brought you there for that interview?
I started writing the book about 3 years ago. I was thinking that neuroscience has learned a lot about healthy practices, about how to keep your mind mentally active and alert, keep your body healthy in old age, which we used to think of as over 60, but 80 is the new 60. So maybe old age starts at 80 or 90 now. But the interesting thing is that there's this great variability in how people age. Some people start to slow down and shut down after 50. Other people are going like gangbusters up to 90 and beyond. And I wanted the book to address the science behind that, what we know that you can do to give yourself the best shot of being one of the ones that does well. And I wanted to talk to people who were doing well. The Dalai Lama is, I don't remember, 86, 87. He's going like gangbusters. He's still mentally very active. He's just published his 125th book. He's meeting with people all day long. He keeps a grueling schedule. He's just toured Europe, in I think 11 cities in Europe. His secret is to get a good night's sleep. He sleeps 10 hours a night.
Wow.
And he meditates. But I met with other leaders too, and other people who are doing well, like Judy Collins, the singer, 79 years old, who's on a tour now of new material with a brand new collaborator, Stephen Stills. I interviewed George Shultz, who's 97 and just published his 11th book, former Secretary of State, former Secretary of the Treasury, still shows up at work every day, is collaborating with a bunch of people. I wanted to get the human side of all of this.
And what is it? What did you find? I would assume that part of that is absolute passion and love for what you do. So when you really love what you do and you do what you love, that keeps you grounded and in life. Is that part of what you discovered?
It's almost all of it. It's exactly that. It's passion and engagement that doesn't wane. Mm-hmm. And it's telling yourself, I'm not going to stop. Everybody that I interviewed, and a number of people I wanted to interview but who turned me down, all said, I don't think about aging. I'm just doing what I always did, and I don't look back. Schultz said this, 97, he's not looking back, he's looking forward. reminds me of Pablo Casals, who was asked towards the end of his life what he still had to look forward to. And he said, well, there's this piece I'm working on, and, I haven't quite got it yet. One of the great cellists of all time. And he's still pushing forward towards the end of his life. Andres Segovia was said to be the same. There's a distinction that we make now in my field between, you're familiar with the term lifespan. It's basically the calculation between when you're born and when you die. It's how many years you get. But that's less interesting to me than another way of looking at it, which is that within that, you've got two sections. You've got the health span and the disease span. Most of us are going to be diseased towards the end of our lives, and will die of some disease. Not everybody. Some people get hit by a bus. Some people just go quickly in their sleep, suddenly. But the trick here is not to maximize your lifespan. To me, that's meaningless if the last 30 years are spent miserably in disease. You want to minimize that disease span and maximize the health span. And the way you do that seems to be to just keep going and keep growing, which I think comes naturally to someone like you, who's an artist and intellectually curious.
There's always so many new things to do, and even this whole series has been inspired truly from my son from the other side. It's like, Mom, now we went from music and opera and teaching, and then we were suddenly doing sound healing, which I had been doing for years, and it's in its own form, but not in the form I was doing it now. I'm doing it now. And then suddenly it was, okay, Mom, we're going to launch this interview series. We want to bring a group of wonderful human beings and experts together to share this power of sound, this sacred science of sound. And for me, you are really representing the brain science part of this. How can we as individuals choose to really light up our brains, to light ourselves up from the inside out? Is it something in addition to the passion of a hobby or something we love to do? What else does that?
The music activates more regions of the brain than anything else we know of. Music does have some special powers, but a lot of times when we're depressed or unmotivated, it's because we feel misunderstood or disconnected from others. And music is one way to help you feel connected, whether you're listening to music that comforts or inspires you, whether you're playing with other people, playing for yourself, even just playing the piano, to be able to put your fingers in the same positions and places that Chopin put his, or that Alicia de la Rocha puts hers, to feel that connection, that muscle, that bodily connection to another person. It's why the healing therapy of touch, of massage, can be very important to people. Talk therapy, engaging with art, engaging with nature. All of these are ways to connect ourselves to the world when we're feeling disconnected. Now, I wouldn't claim that music is the only way. It's one of many different paths, and it works better for some people than others. But it's there. It's part of the palette of colors you can play.
I know I have to think, because I lived in Germany for so many years, and I have to think about, I sang a lot of Beethoven. So I sang the Ninth of Beethoven, I sang Beethoven's opera Fidelio, and there's something in his music. First of all, when I was pregnant with my son, I ended up singing a series of the Ninth of Beethoven until he came early, so 10 days before his birth. And he was so activated by that music that every time we'd be in the car and he'd cry and cry, I'd put the Ninth of Beethoven on and he would be still as a mouse. And I just think about sometimes just the power, the pristine beauty, the organization, the structure of that kind of music, and what that's doing. I obviously don't have your knowledge and experience, but what that's doing inside to us on the mental level.
That's an interesting case. The Ninth, the main theme is really just Beethoven running up the scale, right? It's mi, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, re, you know? So even for a kid, even for a developing fetus in the womb, it's that basic stepwise motion that instantiates the structure of the Western diatonic scale. It's something that is easy to get your brain to react to. Of course, it's the rhythmicity of it that drives the interest if you've already heard the scale before. And it's the fact that he starts on mi, so in effect, it's kind of playing with the Phrygian mode, right? And then the idea that he builds it up and orchestrates it and develops it. One of the things that makes music effective for therapy, and this is true of the healing therapy you do with the bowls as well, is that it exists within a structure. Music is very tightly constrained. There are really only 12 notes in the musical scale. And there's no culture in the world that we know of that has many more than that. It's too much for the brain to handle. So there's 12 basic tones, and really we only use about 7 of them at a time. And if you're talking about rock and folk and country music, 5 of them at a time, a pentatonic scale. Everything else that we hear, the microtonal variations in expression or the things that are slightly detuned. I know you have some bowls that don't hit exact frequencies of the scale. The brain hears them as filigrees or variations or emendations of the basic scale tones. And all of this is an exercise and a game for the brain to play with. How do I incorporate these sounds into the structure that I have for them? Which buckets do they fit in? And how do those buckets relate to one another?
I know it's really fascinating for me. So I'm working often with a 528 hertz tune set or a 432 tune set, or music today, the 440. So and then there's bowls that are every variation in between, and then you can work with the binaural beat, so you can take a half step and get this kind of rub or this kind of sound that makes a portal.
Yeah.
People experience that as a great portal. And it's used, of course, the binaural beat in meditation, but I find all this, it's so fascinating, and it's very unique to each individual. Like you said, how people will experience music very different at different points in their lives, at different times of the day.
There is great variability. You could not say, well, 573.6 hertz is the magic healing frequency for cancer. It doesn't work that way. There are different frequencies that help people in different ways, subject to their own physiology. Everybody's different. You might find that some people are calmed by 432 hertz, others are agitated by it, just in and of itself in isolation. And even the timbre is very subjective. Some people respond to certain timbres and not others. Some people hate accordions, some love them.
Tell me, I'd love to know, are there particular instances in your own life where music has had a profound effect on you? Yeah.
I mean, in the early days, I grew up somewhat of a loner child. And music, for me, was how I learned about other people and other lives, and how I learned about emotions. I found great comfort and solace and companionship in my records, which spanned everything from Beethoven to Duke Ellington and polkas and Spike Jones, and up to, the Beatles and Johnny Cash and Chicago, the group Chicago, all of that stuff. More recently in my life, I started writing my own songs when I was a little kid, and I never stopped. But more recently, I've realized that certain events in my life that I'm trying to figure out I can come to some intrapersonal, some self-knowledge by trying to write about these feelings or experiences, writing songs about them. And there are two instances that come to mind, actually, just in very recent months. One of them was that before going to see the Dalai Lama, I was steeped in reading his works and listening to his lectures and trying to understand his outlook so that I wouldn't squander the opportunity of spending an hour with him. I wanted to ask him stuff that he hadn't talked about before, not just have him, recitate all the stuff that he'd already said. That'd be a waste of both of our times. So I started writing a song about him and his philosophy. And then after I left him in Dharamshala, India, I finished the song. And the song is called There Is Delight.
Would you play that for us?
Sure. This'll be new.
And has the Dalai Lama received a copy of that?
The Dalai Lama doesn't listen to music.
Oh, okay.
It's part of being a monk and his aesthetic lifestyle. Not aesthetic, AES, but aesthetic, the minimalism. So, no, he hasn't received it. And maybe I'll send him the lyrics, but music would be inappropriate, I'm told. There is delight in singing, though none hears. Beside the singer, there is delight, there is delight. There is delight in praising, though the praiser sits alone, and though the praised far off from him, there is delight. All that came before us is just light, and so despite the pleas and pleasantries, we claim the night. Warmer climes give brighter plumage, stronger winds the breeze of alpine heights. You spread your wings and find what's right. The siren sings, the ship's at sea, though none hears. Beside the mast, there is delight, there is delight. There is delight in facing life, delight in cursing death, and though the body is at sea, there is delight. All that came before us is just light, and so despite the pleas and pleasantries, we take the night. Warmer climes give brighter plumage, stronger wings the breeze of alpine heights. You tender strings and find what's right. There is delight in singing out your name, though you're not here. Beside the singer, there is delight, there is delight. There is delight, ties that bind, delight in knowing we are one, and though we are lost, there is delight. All that came before us is just light, and so despite your pleas and pleasantries, we claim night. Warmer climes give brighter plumage, stronger winds the breeze of alpine heights. You play the strings and find what's right. You play the strings and find what's right. You play the strings and find what's right.
Thank you, Dan.
Oh, thank you for asking.
It's so amazing to me to have your gift as a scientist, but also this whole side of you that's a musician, that's worked as a professional musician, that's played with some very great artists, and you have this background that's such a mix and so needed today.
Well, a lot of people are musicians in the background. I have a lot of colleagues in various fields, friends who play music. We sit around, we play music together. It's not what it may be not how we're making our living these days. It might have been at some time. It might have always been a hobby, but it's a great hobby to have. It's very fulfilling for me and for the people who do it. You know, I think giving a child music lessons is a great gift. Because a child who knows how to play music is never alone.
Yeah. And how do you get the inspiration? I mean, obviously this came from your upcoming visit to India. Where does the inspiration come from when you're writing your lyrics? And I know you've got an album that you're working on that's going to be coming out, I think you said next year, in conjunction with your book?
Yeah, fall of 2019.
Fall of 2019. So where do you get your inspiration? What are perhaps some other situations that prompted you to write certain songs?
You know, I think as with many songwriters, the inspirations come from a bunch of different places. I'll be shopping for cereal in the aisle at the grocery store, and a melody and lyrics will pop in my head, and I have no idea where they came from.
About Cheerios or what?
I haven't written about Cheerios yet, but who knows? No, it's unrelated to Cheerios. I'll be, contemplating a visit like this. I'll be reading a poem, and the imagery of the poem will inspire me to play around with some of those pictures and try to put them into my own words. Other songs. There's a recent case I mentioned a few moments ago of a song that I wrote really to help me with my own healing process. It's difficult for me to talk about this, but I had a best friend. We were very close, like brothers. His name was John, and John and I did everything together, and I just always imagined that we would grow old together. We'd be two old men on a park bench, looking back on our lives, making each other laugh. We were always there for each other until one day we weren't, because he committed suicide. And it was 25 years ago. And I was having a really hard time getting over it. And I went through grief counseling and, the things that you usually do, spent time with his family. Nothing worked. And then I decided to write a song about him and about it. But a song that was rich with metaphors and images that weren't literally him, but tried to elevate in a story and in a metaphorical way the feelings that I had about who he is and what he meant to me. And writing that song took me 4 years. And I just finished it a few months ago, and it's helped me. It's helped me because it helped me to figure out feelings it helped me to express in words feelings I couldn't put into words. And those that I still couldn't express in words, I feel that I expressed in music. There's an interplay of the music and the emotion that captures for me the feelings that I was unsuccessful at putting into words. And the song is called The Trumpet Unblown.
You talked to me a little bit about that imagery, how you felt about the languaging of the trumpet and the trumpet unblown.
Yeah, in the week after his death, the family and friends converged to help take care of his affairs and help look after his wife and daughter who he left behind. And that first night we were all together, we all had partners and we all slept with our partners, but we had this weird experience the next morning that we shared with each other that felt like we were sleeping alone. Somehow the loss of John put a cocoon around each of us so that we felt instead of more connected to each other through the loss, less connected. I have the last two lines of the song are that the tents were all silent, we all slept alone. The story takes place somewhere in another time and place, and the idea of there being tents that people live in makes sense in the song, I think. The tents were all silent, we all slept alone, the swords were unlifted, the trumpet unblown. For me, the trumpet was either the trumpet of taps, of, day is done, gone the sun, or also with a suicide, you don't really announce the death in the way that you would if somebody were in an accident or died heroically of a battle of disease or something. That you don't announce it, you don't trumpet it, literally, the play on words there, but I wasn't trying to be clever. It's the idea is that nobody played a note for him after his death, publicly or privately. And so it was a case for me. Songs have helped me to heal and to understand the world my whole life, but here was a case where they helped me to do something very personal.
So understood. I mean, my heart is in my throat at this moment. I'm so sorry for your loss of your best friend. It does, in that moment, you feel this isolation, you feel a connection to the fragility of life, that it's unfathomable that 1 minute you're here and 1 minute you're not. And this connection really of these two worlds that, as people do say, the veil is very thin. But I've come to learn too that my son is here, he's with me. I just can't, it's not the same as if he were still in human form. But there is that feeling of intense fragility of life, and the motivation to live and to live fully. And if you're up for it, I'd love for you to play that.
All right, I'll give it a try. The trumpet unblown for John. Down a sight to behold, a vision in finery, all purple and gold, like the leaves in the forest when autumn has blown. The time comes for knowing all that is shown. Like the leaves in the forest, like the light on your face. Some things stand forever, sometime will erase. For the angel of death spread his wings and took flight to catch his prey. On a cold winter's day, the steed with his nostril all wide. His anger is bleeding, the thorn in my side, and the foam of his gasping lay white at his feet. His blood splayed on raindrops, the chaff and the wheat. There stands my love, or so I've been told. So many pronouncements to have and to hold. For the angel of death spread his wings and took flight to catch his prey on a cold winter's day. There lay the rider, distorted and pale, dew on his brow, dust from the trail, and the tents were all silent. We all slept alone. The swords were unlifted, the trumpet unblown. For the angel of death spread his wings and took flight to catch his prey on a cold winter's day.
I feel, first of all, there's such sweetness in your sound. It's like it's so smooth and there's a sweetness in there. And when I close my eyes, I can feel a vibration that travels through the soles of my feet, all up my body, up my spine, out my head. It's like I feel washed in the melody, in the words, in the tone, everything. How do you feel? How do you feel when you have composed such a thing of beauty for your dear friend? How does that feel to share that with us?
Well, I couldn't hope for a better reception from you. That was beautiful what you said. And of course, Getting in touch with the sweetness and being able to convey it vocally are two different things. And you really helped me profoundly to do that, to be able to deliver the feelings through my voice. I've been singing for years, and people around me would say, "Don't sing." And you helped me to find an authenticity in my singing voice that wasn't there, and I'm grateful for that. And the way it makes me feel is that it makes me feel more human and more alive, that I'm able to get in touch with a deep feeling and process it and learn about it through an art form. It makes me feel really fuller and comforted. It's also emotionally draining to sing the song, to go to that place, and yet the song recharges me at the same time, if that makes any sense.
You know, yes, it does. I sang at the Science and Spirituality Conference in Canada in June, and I decided I wanted to stretch myself with something that I'd not done before, a new piece, and we scored a Puccini aria, Senza Mama, which is about, she's a nun, but she bears a child, it's given away, and then she loses that child to death at age 7. And I thought, well, you know, am I going to step in that? Am I going to step into that vibration? I could have written Puccini's words and music. They fit like a glove, and we scored it with strings and crystal bowls, and it was really hard practicing it. I would weep when I was practicing it, but I was able to get myself to the point, and, you know, you've got to, you know, there's big high notes of sustained voice and a whole classical technique, but I was able to let that sound, the power of that sound and that music to just wash through. And yes, you get exhausted, but there comes a point where it is exhilarating, it is freeing, and that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. It's hard sometimes to verbalize it.
Well, that's the power of music, is that it can, as I said, for me, I don't know that anybody else has this experience, but for me, the chords and the melody and the interplay, the music of that song captures a lot of the emotion, even without the words. It's funny because I have a songwriting teacher, Livingston Taylor, who teaches at Berklee College of Music. And he and I have written 3 songs together over the decades, and we're friends. And often when I have a song that I'm having trouble with, I'll bring it to him. And I brought him this song at one point, and he always wants to see the lyrics first. He's a lyric man. He writes gorgeous melodies too, but I mean, he starts with the lyrics. And he wasn't convinced that the lyrics were telling as good a story as they could. And I said, well, I understand that. There are some things, I've been working on it for 4 years, some things I couldn't put into words, but I think that I put it into music. And when you hear the two together, it'll be different than just reading them off the page. And Livingston, who's a skeptic, said, well, I don't know. But then I played it for him, and within the first 10 seconds, he went, oh yeah, that's it.
And there's a vulnerability. I know you were in an accident before you came to me, and so you couldn't find your voice in the way you had sung before, and we worked therapeutically that way. But there's a vulnerability that anchors everything, brings everything together. And as you're telling me that, I forgot you told me that you taught a songwriting workshop too, didn't you, this year?
I did at Berklee College of Music in Boston. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Oh, I did another one also too, actually. I did one over the summer with Rodney Crowell and Bernie Taupin, Lisa Loeb, and some others. That was a hoot.
Dr. Levitin, you have so many talents, and I'd like to have our audience just know a little bit about, because I was fascinated, having been a university professor, I was fascinated by this whole concept of Minerva and what you guys have founded there in the San Francisco area. I found fascinating and very inspiring, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about the concept of Minerva and how that came to be and what you've done. Do you mind to speak about that?
Yeah, so I spent most of my career at places that are better known because they're older. I had taught at Stanford and Dartmouth, spent most of my career at McGill, taught for a year at UC Berkeley. Minerva isn't well known yet because it's new. It's only been around for 5 years. I've been working for them from the beginning, five and a half years ago. A number of people in the university business, a number of people who spend our lives around universities recognize that there's some weaknesses with the current system. There's too many to list, but one is that education has become, too expensive, and talent and learning shouldn't. Talent isn't limited to the wealthy. And learning shouldn't be restricted to people who can afford $80,000 a year for college. So one thing we wanted to do is make college affordable again and still give a first-class education. We hold tuition at $12,500 a year. We cap it at that, which is a fraction of what you see at the other top universities of our class.
Oh, yes.
And if you can't afford the 12,000, to some people, even that is completely out of reach and unreasonable. So we have scholarships. We provide scholarships to anybody who's in need. And we don't admit people on the basis of how much money they have. The other principle of Minerva is that we want to provide education, as we say, for the sake of the world. We want people to use whatever gifts they have to make the world a better place. And that's fundamental to a Minerva education, is social responsibility, ethical responsibility, and tolerance for other cultures and other lifestyles and other ways of thinking. We don't want a Minerva student to not have an opinion, but we want them to exchange ideas with people who might have different opinions and not be judgmental about those different opinions. And all of this towards trying to create a more harmonious, better world for all of us to live in.
I mean, and that is the point of education. It's exactly the point of education, but especially living in Europe for so many years, education is practically free there. So anyone that qualifies and applies can get a place in a university to study. And it's true, our system it's tough, and people have student loans for many, many years. And I was so excited when you spoke to me first about what you were doing with Minerva, and that the students have, 3 months at a time in India or in Korea or in South America. I mean, this is fascinating because I've learned in my own life, the second I went from California to New York first, and then from New York to Europe, where you really are confronted with a different culture and language, you learn so much about yourself. It's every young person should have that experience if it's possible.
We rotate them through 7 different cities during their 4 years, because it's one thing to learn about another culture. It's quite another thing to live in another culture and to see how people live, hear their stories on the street, interact with them. And part of education for the sake of the world is that in every community our students live in, they have to give back to the community. They have to do some form of volunteer work to make the community better than when they arrived. And we think that that's a good template for living the rest of their lives as well.
Ethics, that's incredible. It's incredible philosophy. Yes, and you know that I saved for my son's education, and so it was only fitting and inspirational for me to be able to offer a scholarship also for a Minerva student for their studies in the name of Dylan Sage. That is exactly the kind of university that he would have loved to have gone to, and he was also a man of many talents, and yeah.
Yeah, the Dylan Sage Scholarship will help students to become independent, to get a first-class, world-class education, to be around other like-minded do-gooders, if you will, smart do-gooders who want to make the world a better place. And it will help students to be able to focus their efforts on their studies and their community work, and to not have to worry about the finances, which can be a burden. And I should mention that we also believe that in self-efficacy and self-responsibility. Every student who accepts a scholarship also has to do some work study. They have to have a stake in their own education. We don't give them 100% of everything they need. And that's a principle. You know, we either get them jobs in the community, or some are internships that are paid, or we have them work for us doing various administrative tasks during the year, clerical things, just so that they understand that the best help comes to those who are willing to help themselves.
And I think you mentioned to me that, for example, there was a Chinese student, you told me, that was from in the countryside and was the first young woman in her family to attend higher education.
She was an extraordinary student. She'll be graduating this year. She was one of my favorite students. She had grown up in rural China, and it was during a time when the parents didn't want a daughter because they were only allowed to have one child, and they really wanted a son to help out on the farm. And they expressed to her from a very young age that they were disappointed she had been born a girl, and that they didn't know what they were going to do. And rather than be devastated by that or undone by it, she had this inner strength and resilience that led her to attend a high school in a nearby city. And, you know, she was from a rural area where a lot of people wouldn't attend high school. They would just work the farm, work the land. And then she applied to Minerva and came, and she was one of our best students. And, you know, when I think about the trajectory of her life, first person in her family to attend college, first person in her village to attend college. We've got students from over 60 countries.
Wow.
And from all different kinds of economic backgrounds, many of whom are first-generation college students, many of whom turned down admission to Ivy League or Ivy equivalent schools because they didn't see the point. They didn't want to be stuck in classrooms with 500 students. We limit class size to 17 or 18.
Wow.
They didn't want to be fueling a kind of me first attitude, which happens in a lot of the elite schools. They wanted to instead exercise their social consciousness. We're glad to have them.
Dr. Levitin,
grateful for your support. I suppose we should provide a link so that if anybody else would like to contribute to the Dylan Sage Scholarship.
Yes, please.
In Dylan's memory, yes.
That would be amazing. Anyone would like to contribute to it or apply for it.
Exactly. And even $5, anything that people can afford. 100% of all the money that goes into the scholarship goes to the students. There's no overhead or administrative costs extracted.
And you said you have how many applicants per year, and how many do you take?
Well, the rough numbers, I'm not in the admissions unit, but roughly speaking, we have 13,000 applicants for 250 positions.
Wow.
Very selective. But we're not just looking for raw smarts. We're looking for passion, just to circle back to that thing we talked about at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking for people who are passionate, who are lifelong learners, and who really want to make the world a better place through their actions, not merely through their words.
And if you have a vision, do you have a vision of your work in the world? You really have so much that you're doing in many different areas. What would that vision be?
You know, I haven't really ever thought about it. I think the common theme is that I've just always enjoyed learning. And I've always enjoyed sharing whatever it is I learned in any domain. And so I've spent most of my life as an educator in one form or another. And just broadly writ, I learn things, I share them. I learn other things, I share those. Sometimes I learn things that contradict things I used to know, and I share that.
Is there anything you would like to leave our audience with? Any last message or music, or what would make your heart be joyous?
My heart would be joyous if you would play one of those bowls for a moment to close us out.
Which one would you like to hear?
I'm feeling in a C-sharp kind of mood.
Oh, wow. You know what's really amazing? And I'm not kidding now. I exactly thought of the C-sharp bowl when you said that. That is wild.
Well, the trumpet unblown was in C-sharp.
That's amazing, because this is a fairly new bowl, and I was actually given this by the company to play at the Science and Spirituality Conference, and this became one of my favorite bowls. This is what we call a cry-on bowl. It's
Because you can cry on
it? No. Lee Carroll is an amazing channeler who channels an entity cry-on, and this bowl was made with 6 different elements. There's 6 different gemstones in it, so it's one of our more advanced bowls, but I always say I never met a bowl that I didn't like, but this is especially, and this one is, it's tuned to 528 hertz. So it has that frequency of unconditional love, and it's a really powerful bowl.
Beautiful.
So thank you, Dr. Levitin. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for your time, for all your amazing wisdom and light and joy and talent and inspiration. And thank you for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure and my honor. Thank you.
All right, so we'll look forward to looking at your page and seeing what's available from you, your music, and looking forward to your new book. It'll be coming out next year, and learning from you with all the fantastic things you're doing. So thank you again for joining the Sacred Science of Sound, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.